You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers.
Hey everyone! Today's OffHeap show is special. We actually went to DevNexus and did a live recording with all the gang. We even have a quiz at the end where we challenge our guests to figure out who said that quote. Was it a ChatGPT quote or a real quote? So before we dive in, I wanted to thank our sponsor Datadog. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 450 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environment and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. So we thank them for sponsoring this episode of OffHeap. And if you want to go check it out, you have to go to javaoffheap.com/Datadog. And again, that URL is javaoffheap.com/Datadog. So go check them out. And after that, let's get this show on the road. Welcome to Java OffHeap episode 79, live from DevNexus, or recorded live on DevNexus, I say. How do you call it? You say that live on tape, right? Yeah, that's how you say it.
Sure.
Live on tape. All right. For those who are tuning in, this is essentially a session that we keep submitting a talk to DevNexus, which is a conference that happens in Atlanta. Super, super cool conference, and they keep accepting us. So we keep showing up, and we essentially do live interviews and have a little bit of a quiz trivia game at the end. So it's going to be a very, very fun. This is one of the few episodes we got all the gang together. Usually every time we record a DevNexus, there's always one of us missing.
It's usually Josh.
Usually one trying to be polite.
I was trying to be nice about it, but
without throwing the one guy under the bus. Well, last year was me too.
Yes, last year was just a two-man show, right? But
yeah.
we had more guests last year. I thought we tried to fill in.
We probably should get to our intros.
But it's great being here. For those who don't know, one of the things we do in the show is we introduce ourselves. So for those who don't know me, my name is Freddie Guime. I'm a distinguished principal engineer at Expedia, author, speaker, Java champion, Seattle Java Users Group, co-organizers, and I'm here with my usual suspects.
So Michael Manella, Senior Director responsible for Spring R&D at VMware, Java champion, author, speaker, curmudgeon at large.
All right. Bob Paulin, I'm an independent consultant from Chicago, focused on JVM technologies. Java champion, Apache Software Foundation member, speaker, and CJUG board chair.
Josh Juneau, Jakarta E, Java developer, author, speaker, and Java champion, Jakarta E ambassadors, and also work with the Apache NetBeans project.
And we have a special guest today. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Brian Fox, co-founder, CTO, Sonatype, Apache Software Foundation member, former chair of the Apache Maven project, current governing board member of the Open Source Security Foundation, and probably a few things I forgot. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we start with the big news item. So no, let's see. Very first thing, announcements. I guess this one is Josh, right? DevX UK?
Sure, yep, I'll go ahead. And DevX UK is happening in May, and that's going to be happening the 10th through the 12th. So if you can get out there, that would be great.
Next up, Spring I/O Barcelona. If you've never been to Barcelona, highly recommend it. Beautiful city, great event. It's May 18th and 19th. Just definitely check it out.
If you get a chance to go to Germany in June, you should go to JCon 2023. It's in Cologne, Germany, and Richard Fitchner, who is one of the organizers of the conference, is here. Great gentleman, and if you have a chance to talk to him about it, I'm sure he would give you lots of information. J-Con.
Next up, Spring 1 at Explorer. So this year we're combining Spring 1 with VMware Explorer. It's going to be in Vegas, baby.
Sin City.
Yep. So August 21st through the 24th. So definitely check it out. Excited to be back in person. Yeah.
Call for proposals or paper or talks is still open for that, right?
It will
Just
be,
a few
although
more
it
days?
it depends on when we get this out. May be closed by the time we publish this.
Okay. Yep. Just folks in the audience.
If it's before April 14th, please submit.
All right. And last but not least, Community Over Code Conference is the new rebranded ApacheCon that's going to be out this year. That's going to be in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So all these conferences you have to just travel to, I guess. But yeah, so the Apache Software Foundation is rebranding their conference to Community Over Code, and they are also having call for papers open. They've got several tracks, which I have somewhere.
Nova Scotia, that's a novel location.
I know.
That's cool.
From what I hear, it's just easier to get into Canada than here. So there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, API microservices, big data, community, content, data engineering, fintech, frameworks, geospatial, Groovy, incubator, IoT, and performance engineering, and finally search are the tracks this year. So also open call for proposals. All right, that was it. So, yeah.
No, I think for the next.
Oh, for the next one. Okay, hold on. I've switched over just to get to the tracks. Yeah, so just kind of on the same vibe of kind of ASF, there's a kind of a sad news report. I don't know if anybody's followed the news. Bob Lee has died. He was kind of an original kind of Apache Software Foundation member involved in a lot of JSRs, Java community. So just want to reach out, folks that may have known him. I know there's people at the conference that have contributed to JSRs, so just wanted to express condolences for that.
Yeah, for sure. Will do.
Okay. Do you want me to take the next one?
Yes.
Java 20 is released. So you should go and grab it and don't use it in production. Everything is in preview at this point on Java 20.
Brian gets his steam is coming out of his ears after that comment.
You can, at your own risk, at your own peril. I think it'll be okay. You should definitely download it and take a look at it and try it out, because this has got lots of great things, record patterns, pattern matching for switch, scope values, virtual threads is the big one, structured concurrency, foreign function and memory API, and the vector API. They're either an incubator or preview, and we're hoping that in JDK 21 we get to see virtual threads at least, and maybe even a few of these, and final. And then the other, to follow that up, JavaFX 20 has been released. This is released in March, and it does require JDK 17 or greater, but it's great to see JavaFX moving forward and making strides.
Like Java on the desktop, still alive.
Yeah.
Alive and kicking. All my swing knowledge is not going it's not going anywhere. I still can use it. So.
Yeah.
I don't know that good luck with that, but sure, Freddie, you keep telling yourself that.
But it was so hard to learn JTables.
Oh, come on, you're missing AWT.
That I don't miss. AWT, no, that's a line I don't want to cross. But yeah, all right. So I think those were all the news that there are out of the way, and now to the big discussion topics. Bob, why don't you lead us in?
Yeah, so I think, one of the reasons having Brian on is in the news right now. There's a lot of talk around open source and security. Last year, or is it last year or 2 years ago that we had, I think it was technically 2 years ago, we had Log4j security incident, and that I think triggered a lot of things within the industry.
You mean SolarWinds?
SolarWinds. There's a number of incidents that have come up that I think are starting to drive a lot of conversations around security and software. And naturally, with open source being everywhere, open source is one of the things that are being under consideration is how we do security in open source projects. So one of the biggest things is, you have people contributing to these projects and you need to build the software, and there's a number of things that you can do where you're bringing in other code to build your code. You have dependencies. So it's all a big interconnected network. So build pipeline security is a big deal, and I know, Brian, your company kind of specializes in that, being Sonatype and Maven Central. So there's a number of foundations that are being built out around it, like OpenSSF. And we just kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that are impacting these industries, some of the legislation that is coming out, and what effect that's going to have on developers that write code for open source projects.
Really quick, before you get into that, Brian, for our listeners who may not understand where Sonatype fits into the infrastructure of our ecosystem, can you kind of lay out a little bit with regards to how Sonatype fits in? You mentioned some Maven stuff that you're involved with, but how does that all fit together?
Yeah, so for historical fluke of history, I suppose, Sonatype has always been the provider of what the world calls Maven Central repository, right? So Maven Central is not officially part of the Apache project. That goes back even before my time, right? So we've always been running Maven Central. So what does that mean, really? It means if you're using open source Java, you're downloading it from our systems, which means if you're doing Java, you're using open source, so you're getting it from us. Which
means you own Brian a beer.
Right. which is kind of an interesting place to be, right? It gives us really unique visibility, but it also has a lot of responsibility that we take very seriously about the security and the provenance of all the things in there, which years ago, probably 2011, kind of led to the aha moment that led to some of our product portfolio. That we started the company doing Maven training and consulting. Our first product was Nexus Repository Manager. But then around 2011, we started noticing some really weird things in the download statistics. I remember at that time, there was a level 10 vulnerability in Bouncy Castle, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Bouncy Castle, the white room, clean room implementation of crypto libraries. Yeah. But that level 10 vulnerability had been fixed, I think at that point, a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. It was not new. And yet it was the most popular version of that library at that time. And we looked at that and we're like, that's not the right answer. What's going on here? So we kind of progressively started to unpack that, which led us to building solutions that the world would now refer to them as SCA tools, I guess, although, I don't like the A. Analysis is just a means to an end. We've been trying to help people manage the supply chain. So that's a bit of the history. So I've seen a lot of things in this and been doing a lot in this area for well over 10 years, in addition to what we've been doing Maven Central. So I think that's maybe context.
And to understand, right? Like as engineers, software developers, right? You go in, you start getting the latest things, right? Because if you're doing a greenfield development, you get the latest, and that's great. But if you think that once you make that commit and that goes live, the work is done, the thing that happens is you get this, where you are using. Every time we're depending on we actually have dependencies, is one of the things that you always now need to figure out how I'm going to manage this project, because vulnerabilities are discovered every day, and some are fine, you don't have to worry that much about it. Some are incredibly important, like Log4Shell, which ruin every Java developer's Christmas. We even have teachers.
Not all of them. I can tell some stories. Not all of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a good story out of it. Okay, that's good, because I only hear bad stories. So I'd love to hear a good story on Log4Shell. But yeah, it's something that maybe the first time you're working is something you don't really think. You're just trying to get the thing out the door. But if a project is of significance and is going to be long-lived, these are things that you need to worry about. And there's also sometimes this mentality is like, oh my gosh, we're behind a firewall.
like, oh, we don't need to worry about anything. We don't even need to like secure anything inside, right? And that is the other part where there is a very specific condition when that holds true. But if somebody just happens to have a malformed payload that just happens to go down the stack, suddenly you hit Log4Shell, you hit Heartbleed, you hit all these other things that could happen. So not being out in the forefront or just saying I'm behind a firewall, it doesn't mean that you have to forget about security either. That's something that we all, bad actors is not just necessarily man in the middles, it's just malformed payloads, or not sanitized inputs that could start triggering this chain of, oh, I was using a bad dependency in struts, and suddenly the social security numbers of everybody in the U.S. got leaked, right? And that is actually not hyperbole, that actually happened. So that was the Experian leak.
It's funny you mentioned that example because in around 2011, 2012, when we started trying to figure out how do we solve this problem, I talked to developers, open source developers. I'm not going to name names, but people who should know, right? And these weren't just 9 to 5, C players. And I talked to them about this problem. They say, well, I have a firewall and a security team. No joke. That's like an exact quote. And the only thing I have to worry about is AGPL. Right, so in 2011, 2012, whenever this was, that was the state of what I would consider well-informed open source developers in terms of the space around security of components. Some of our first customers were actually asking us to help them with licenses, not security. Even though the bouncy castle thing was kind of that aha moment for us, there was a lot of denial in the industry. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we now accept that this is real, right? But it took a lot of bad things to get us progressively to that place. And I think that tracks, that's humanity, right? Pick an industry, cars, seatbelts, food safety, take your pick. They all follow that same trend.
What have you seen that's moved? So bouncy castle, obviously, the very early example. Probably the one that, at least from my perspective, has gotten, I don't want to say more attention, but has broken out of the IT developer ecosystem and has gotten the attention of people outside of our industry is the SolarWinds thing. And so
there was definitely an inflection point there, no question. Yeah.
So what have you seen and what actions have you taken with regards to?
Yeah. So 2013 actually was a bit more insider, but people in the financial industry might remember this one. There was a struts vulnerability.
Yep.
Not the Equifax one, by the way, a different one. And Anonymous was doing their thing around the same time, and a lot of big banks conveniently went offline for maintenance at the same time. Now, draw your own conclusions from that. But the financial industry really got the religion around our types of tools. They were our biggest vertical around that time for that reason. They said, wow, there really is a risk here. Fast forward a little bit more, you saw a commons collection problem. Some hospitals got ransomwared. Kind of hit the news, but people weren't paying attention. Heartbleed, shell shock. Marketing teams put labels and names on them. That's when you started to see it on. You started to see it on the news at that point, right?
Yep.
And then of course the next struts with Equifax.
Yeah.
And then, I think SolarWinds was the next big thing, and that's a stretch to call that. It's not really open source, right? But it was definitely a supply chain attack.
Right? Which that's the reason I bring it up with you is because it's not. You aren't necessarily you have a bunch of proprietary products, right? You're not 100% open source, but you are definitely with a key piece of infrastructure within that supply chain.
Right.
Now, what about because I'm trying to remember, there were so many. What exactly happened with SolarWinds?
Okay, so SolarWinds was a company that provided, I believe it was monitoring software. Don't quote me on that part. But they were ubiquitous. They were in governments. They were in financial institutions. They had a massive installed base. And what happened was their CI system was attacked. And that allowed...
I thought it was their email server.
It eventually got to their CI. The initial attack vector may have been an email server, but eventually what happened was a CI system injected a backdoor into a patch that went out to all of their customers. And so as people installed this patch, they were essentially installing a backdoor from the vendor.
Right.
And so,
It was trusted.
exactly, yeah, so it was released from the vendor, everybody assumed it was safe and signed and whatnot, and so that really shook a lot of places to the core with regards to, like, just because I get software, to your point, signed from a vendor, means it's safe. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
Right.
And so now we've seen, like, governments around the world having executive orders or legal things put in place to set certain requirements. And so, I come to you with regards to, like, how does that impact what Maven Central's positioning and things, and how Sonatype handles that and whatnot?
Yeah, so fun fact, in 2013, there was a bill called the Royce Bill that was basically had the same words that subsequently came out in the executive order around S-bombs. So we missed an opportunity.
Convenient.
10 years, almost 10 years. That happened, right? You can look it up, which is unfortunate, but here we are. And so, the executive order, the U.S. executive order kind of came out and laid out a bunch of things, including having NIST define standards and things like that. But the one that most people focus on is that SBOM requirement, right?
Yeah.
The SBOM standing for Software Bill of Materials. They basically said if you want to sell things to the U.S. government this August in 2023 is when it takes effect, you need to be able to provide an SBOM. Now, the exact requirements were a little bit weak. You have to provide it via a paper or like an attributions report on your website. We're not talking about SPDX, Cyclone level requirements, but it at least started the conversation, which was useful, I suppose.
And so I've already started to see some movement around the space, like GitHub now, I believe, just recently announced that they have a tool that you can generate an SBOM with and whatnot. So are you seeing more of that from other, obviously GitHub's obviously a key hub of open source, but like things going into Central, like is that something that we could see getting from Central, for example?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like how does that interface with that aspect?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think we're in the middle of a hype cycle on SBOM. Everybody's talking about it, doing it.
disagreement there.
There's no question about that. I kind of roll my eyes at it a little bit because that's kind of how I am, but also I feel like the SBOM is a means to an end.
I'm the curmudgeon on this podcast. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I might take that trophy for a little bit, but when they started talking about SBOM, I'm like, what are you talking about? We've been doing that forever. Like the point is not to make the list. The point is what you do with the list. And so the analogy that I use, and people in the know don't like it, but I point this out, what the executive order effectively said is this equivalent. So auto manufacturers, you expect that your auto manufacturer can do a recall when you have airbags that have problems or brakes or whatever, right? Imagine we said, you know what? You don't have to do that anymore. But when you sell a car, print out the bill of materials and put it in the glove box every time you sell that car, right? It's kind of a ridiculous concept, and yet that is literally exactly what the SBOM mandate is saying to do.
But the counter argument to that though is the automotive manufacturer may not have to print it out and put it in the glove box, but they have the list.
That's my point, that they have the list and they're using it to manage the stuff. Remember I said I didn't like the A, I like the M, the management. The SBOM is only about just like listing it out, right? And so what that effectively does is it pushes the responsibility onto the receiver, the consumer, to have this SBOM and figure out, are the things in this thing I bought, do they have vulnerabilities? So I'm not saying it's not an important step. It's definitely important because it's driven the conversation. But it sort of misses the mark, and I've been trying to push some of the policy more towards, can we actually incent the equivalent of a recall? Because that's what really matters, right? And I think we're getting there with some of the more recent strategy that we'll probably talk about.
And then, what I want to do is for the Gradle and developers who might not have known what bomb is.
Really?
It's either you're for
There are Ant developers still out there?
Really?
There's
Well, the bill of materials is just literally that. It's the list of the components that are inside.
It's a list of dependencies
That's
and
right.
versions.
I said, half in jest, but actually not, it didn't ruin everybody's, Log4j didn't ruin everybody's Christmas. We have stats, so we put out every year. Our most recent one was in October, the state of the software supply chain, so you can see the charts on this. But we did some analysis on customers that had tooling like ours in place that already knew about their organizational bill of materials. They already knew everywhere in their organization where Log4j was. We had a company, big financial company, had more than 4,000 applications. They remediated Log4j, 80% of it in 4 days. They hit 100% within the first week. They got to take their Christmas vacation because they were managing their supply chain. Whereas I talked to other organizations who didn't have this, and they spent 6 months just going around trying to figure out if and where they were using Log4j. So there is a vast difference between the companies that are actually taking this seriously and doing something about it, and those that are just being very reactionary.
And it's interesting because so right now Sonatype has a way to essentially help you manage
That's right.
that organizational build of materials. So you can say like, oh, all these projects are in need of a relook or upgrade, right?
Yep.
This is just curious. Is there so shading is evil?
Yes.
Can we detect the shading of that? The answer is yes, because we do binary analysis. So, and this a little bit of history. Way back when we started doing this, even though we were the Maven company, a lot of our target audience was still using Ant and stuff. So I couldn't build my analysis on the Maven POM, right? Even though that's what we did. We basically, funded the development of Maven 3 at the time. So we did binary analysis working backwards from the final runtime. The epiphany I had was it doesn't matter how this thing gets built. When you go to put the Java artifact on the runtime to run, it has to fit one of a few conforming ways. It's a jar, an ear, a war. And we know what that looks like, so we can work backwards. And so when we do that, we fingerprint all the class files, so when things are shaded in, we still recognize that it's there. And so this is also in that report, the vulnerable method for log4 shell that was the...
one class.
I forget the name, the
JNDI.
JNDI, I forget the exact name of the class, exists in 19,000 other packages in the ecosystem. Not just Java, by the way. It's in NPM, Python, and .NET packages too, right? And there were other there were other projects. Some of those projects were not actually repackaging of Log4j. Some of those had reused that exact same JNDI package in their own custom code. It's possible those have similar vulnerabilities for the exact same reason. So because of that deep fingerprinting, we can do, anytime that thing shows up, we will flag it, even if it's been shaded, even if it's been slightly modified, which is kind of cool.
Have you done any form of outreach to those projects that you've identified?
We have tried to track it down. Yeah. I mean, I know we had some conversations early on when we were trying to figure out some of the Spring stuff. Yeah.
So with the Log4Shell stuff, and
that's right.
The context there is obviously Log4Shell, big thing. Spring Boot doesn't depend on it, but so we did the Christmas. Did you miss your Christmas that year? The Spring team, by and large, did not, because Spring doesn't depend on Log4j. So we were fortunate that, however, there were certain dependencies that tend to be popular. And so we worked together with regards to identifying what those were, getting those patched and addressed quickly. And it was kind of like what you mentioned before about it wasn't necessarily the most popular one, or it was the most popular one. It wasn't necessarily the latest one. Right. For some of that stuff. So just making sure that was addressed quickly.
Right. So you asked about the central stuff and SBOMs, right? So we are making progress towards getting to a place where I would like to require SBOMs for everything that gets published into central. But there's a series of steps we have to go through to get into the place, so carrot and stick kind of approach. But we've been working a lot with the Cyclone project. Sonatype contributed the first, I think we called it the security extension several years ago to carry vulnerability payload with Cyclone. And so we've recently, worked on the Maven plugin. The Apache Commons project actually adopted it on their own, but there was some friction. So one of our developers made it better, and now we're working on rolling it out within the Maven project, and then hopefully by adding it to what's called the Apache POM, we can enable that more easily by default for anything in Apache.
Yep.
And as we work through that, then we can get to a place where then we can point for any other Java project and say, here, this is how you do it. You just add this plugin, and it will just magically work. And then we can get to a place where we can start actually enforcing it. right? So it's a multi-step. When you're talking about 40 to 50,000 individual publishing projects and a whole bunch of forges and millions of users, we have to think through these steps very carefully.
Now, one of the things that when the conversation starts with SBOM, usually a topic that comes up quickly after that is provenance.
Mm-hmm.
And so how does, I know there's been some conversations about the provenance of open source artifacts in Central, and there's efforts like salsa.dev and that kind of thing. So what's your take on that aspect of it?
That's a much harder story to tell, isn't it? The standards are working on being able to carry that type of information. When we first started doing some of the stuff in the early days, it became quickly an anti-pattern for companies to recompile Java components. It would break the hashes and do funky things. But I think we're coming back to a place where that might become more a norm, that hermetically sealed builds might become a useful thing.
We're definitely hearing about clients that are,
Yeah.
like they're having active conversations like, we're going to rebuild all the open source that we get.
Mm-hmm. And we have several very large customers who are in fact doing that. It was one of these things when they started talking about it, I sat down with them and I said, I just want to make sure you understand the mountain you're about to climb.
I've said for years,
Yeah.
business opportunity, anybody in the audience looking for a startup idea, like be able to guarantee provenance from source to binary and have somebody, a lawyer that's willing to sign off on it.
Right. Yeah.
Back up the money truck, people will pay.
Right.
So, and just to understand like the issue, right, is that there's source code on GitHub. There is a jar on Maven Central, and for most of the time, the source code says this is the branch or whatever feature tag of this that should match what the jar is. But right now, there's no mechanism. We just trust the system.
Yeah.
Basically, it's prove it.
There's no good way to tie it together.
It's basically prove it.
That's right. Right.
Right. So the issue that can happen there, and I guess this is, I don't know if it's out of the, I mean, this is a problem that we always have, and I don't know if it got amplified after SolarWinds, but the idea is that somebody might have a different kind of like artifacts being published that is not necessarily the code that you're looking at GitHub. Right?
I mean, some of this goes back to some things that historically we may not have, as an industry, done the best. For example, like enabling HTTP for repositories. And this wasn't only a central thing. Like they all did it, right? Like, so I'm not trying to poke fun or anything like that. But like enabling HTTP for artifact repositories, like there are great security demos where you man in the middle of that traffic and you can inject whatever you want into the jar file, and all of a sudden you've got a back door. Like so, like we've done things that we. Don't get me wrong, that's been fixed, so we're better as an industry, but like that kind of thing opens up the question of like, again, how do I know the source code here equals the binary here that ends up in my app running on my server?
Right.
Yeah.
It's like yeah, and that was one of the things, like Maven Central, I kind of remember that we're switching to HTTPS, and it's like, all right, sure. If you put it in there, one extra character commit, and you're done, right? But but you can still hear the collective moan is like, you're making me work, right?
But the implications of that, like the implications were, to your point, like it was a super minor change that everybody had to do, but the implications of it were immense.
Yeah, like just imagining, and this is like man in the middle is a thing, and please do not turn off cert verification. That's just a PSA. Yeah.
Well,
right.
And I guess one of the things we know on the show, we're not going to be able to talk through, how are we going to solve, making sure that we have builds that are equal to the source code exactly how we intend to. But, the framework that's being thrown out in a lot of the government legislation seems to be targeting it almost as if it's a manufacturing problem. Like you look at the documents, it's like the manufacturer of the software needs to do X, Y, and Z. And I guess my question is just some of the things we're talking about, is manufacturing really the right analogy even to think about this problem?
I think it is, but I come at it from a different perspective a little bit. Before we go there, I want to drop this stat. So we did an analysis, again, in this State of Software Supply Chain report. We looked at the things being consumed from Maven Central when they're vulnerable, we found that 96% of the time when something is downloaded that is vulnerable, there's already a fixed version available, right? Yeah. So I spend a lot of time in conversations at the OpenSSF and other forums and all these kinds of things where everybody's talking about we need better signatures, we need better tooling, we need better digital identity, like all the hard problems. And then I stand up and say, guys, you're focused on solving 4% of the problem.
Equifax.
96% of the problem are organizations that are consuming components, are consuming known vulnerable things. This is not about open source fixing stuff better. Log4j, that team patched that thing because it was irresponsibly disclosed in China over Thanksgiving weekend. No actual commercial organization would have done it in that fast a time.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet, as of last I looked, it's on our website 2 weeks ago, 29% of the versions being downloaded from Maven Central 2 weeks ago. This is like, what, 16, 17 months post were of the vulnerable versions, right? So you know, my big soapbox is pushing on organizations to do a better job. And so when I think about manufacturers, I'm thinking about the car manufacturer, the people who are putting the final assembly together before they take it to the market, not the individual. Like you take Takata airbags, like certainly there were some implications there, right? But I think we would think about it differently if an auto manufacturer today was taking those known vulnerable airbags and selling new cars with them. We would look at that very, very differently, right? And that is the equivalent of what's happening. And so I think some of the policy and the strategy from the Biden administration is actually focusing on that aspect. And I think a lot of people read into it that there's a lot of burden coming for open source. I think the European Union's Cyber Resiliency Act has some problematic language in it that might get you to that point. And I really hope that it doesn't come to that. But at least what's happening in sort of the conversations here in the U.S. is very much focused on, you know, the company that's pulling this stuff, that's making these choices, and then selling it.
Yeah.
That's where the liability should be.
One of the things that,
I was just going to say, I know it's a complex thing, but has there ever been any discussion on just cutting off these vulnerable versions of the software and making them unavailable? I mean, it would break a lot of things.
They complain about an S.
But it would force people to
There have been, yes, conversations I kind of can't really talk about, but yes, there have been, and the choice has been not to do that. And it's not a choice that Sonatype made alone.
Sure.
Right? We're not going to play God in this regard. But you know, and I had this conversation with some people in the government, and what I remind them is, look, Log4j, I use it as a barometer of how bad this consumption problem really is, because never, in my experience, has there ever been a vulnerability that had the combination of it was so widely used, so relatively easy to exploit, and everybody was talking about it. That last part, really important, because there's very few examples where you'd want to sit there and say, you know what, even if I can prove I'm not vulnerable, I'm probably still going to do it anyway, just because all of my customers are asking me what I'm doing about it.
Yeah.
So there's like, everybody should update. Most vulnerabilities, as we all know, are not that globally applicable. So the logic that people, they sort of think about Central and they say like, well, aren't you like the supermarket that keeps selling the tainted food? It's like, no. If something was actually malicious, then yes, of course we'd take it down. This is more like peanut butter. Peanut butter will kill a whole bunch of people. And yet you can find plenty of peanut butter in every grocery store because it's about the context of the consumer who's using it. And most vulnerabilities actually look like that. So even if we did do something like take Log4j down, it actually doesn't solve the broader problem. It just kicks the can further down the road, right? Again, that's that 96% problem. If we can get people making better choices, that's what's going to move the needle on this.
Sure.
it also goes at the heart of what has made, at least in my opinion, Central successful in the first place. Central's been, one of the things that has made Central successful in the first place is its immutability. Once it's there, it never changes. We haven't had the problems that you've heard about Node4j and their repositories where one person developed
Left bad.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going. Yep. Yeah. Like somebody writes a two-line utility that everybody incorporates. All of a sudden, it's gone, and the world breaks. Like Central has not had that problem, and that's immutability is at the very core of that success.
I mean, this is, again, that burden that comes with having this big repo, but some of those conversations, especially in the early days, were like, look, if organizations actually are prioritizing their effort right now, today, on fixing Log4j in places where they know that this is a problem, and they're ignoring the ones where they're pretty sure it's not, if we decide to break all of those things on them, you're creating more problems, right? You're pulling the brain surgeon out of surgery to put a Band-Aid on a knee. So it's much more complex than it looks like at face value. But I think the tainted lettuce versus peanut butter is the way to think about it. These things usually are more like peanut butter, where you have to be responsible.
Sure. That's a good analogy.
All right. Now, Brian, thanks for that kind of like overview and the discussion that we have. But one of the things that we have on this podcast every time we do a live show or live on tape is we have this kind of like fun, cool quiz we submit our unsuspecting guests to. So
I had a feeling that was coming. They were way too happy about this game.
So because this is going to be the talk of the town, right? Like there is this ChatGPT thing, right? Which apparently can mimic the voice of whoever you want them to mimic. So we have this now. This quiz here is we're going to give you 2 quotes. One of them was from the person that we said the quote is from, and another one was a quote generated by ChatGPT that doesn't exist, but was done on the voice of that person. Mm-hmm. And your job, if you choose,
guess.
Yeah, is to choose. Well, we're not going to make you choose. You gotta play this game.
Okay.
So, are we ready? There's no prize.
Just my pride. That's good enough.
All right. So this is Venkat, and here's 2 quotes. One of them is from Venkat. One of them is generated by ChatGPT. The first one is, Java is steadily moving in the direction of low ceremony and improved efficiency. The other quote is, Java's evolving capabilities and enduring popularity indicate a bright future for the language. Which one of these is Venkat's real quote?
Wow. There's not a lot of words to go on there, is there? I'm going to go with the second one.
So second one is your choice.
And I'm wrong.
Being fooled by ChatGPT. Actually, I think we can play it. I think Bob is the only one who actually showed this. I showed this. So let's see what.
Well, I'll let my score be known afterwards. So
I felt like the first one was too perfect, that the grammar in the second one was not quite perfect enough.
So
it's
I
from
figured,
Venkat, though.
So
I know, but still, I figured like the computer would have like more
Like a
perfect
little bit
grammar.
more.
Yeah.
so Freddie and Bob know the answers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you?
I don't.
Okay, so Josh and I don't. So we could just go down the line and see.
Sure. No, it's more. There's not that many.
Oh, so you just want to throw Brian under the bus is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Do I get another chance? Okay.
Oh
yeah.
Here we go.
Here we go.
This is Brian Getz. He talks about training a lot. So one of these quotes is from him. The first quote is, threat safety in Java demands a thorough grasp of concurrency and synchronization to achieve truly dependable and scalable software. The second quote is, threat safety isn't just about avoiding data races, it's also about preserving intended ordering across operations. Which one of these is Brian Getz' true quote?
Wow, this is hard. I'm gonna go with the second one again.
Second one. What about?
That's my vote. That's my vote.
Yeah, probably the second one.
All right. And yes.
Yay! All right, 50-50.
You got one right, one wrong. Let's keep going.
Oh, come on.
You wanted to play.
I'm going to get this right.
Now the question is, do you know which one?
This will be.
With a bunch of my team in the audience.
So this is a quote by Michael Minella. Which one is it? Spring prioritizes simplicity and modularity to build scalable enterprise applications, Or Spring is not just a framework, it's a way of thinking about building enterprise applications.
I actually said one of those.
I think, again, it's probably the second one.
For the record, did I verbally say it or did I write
I
it?
think it's actually like I did ask for a source on this one. There is a source.
But I'm asking if I wrote it or I said it.
It was...
Was it a video or was it a blog post?
No, it was in an interview.
Oh, shit. All right. I'm going to guess the...
No pressure.
It's like, you're the most knowledgeable person of Michael Minoa.
Obviously not. I'm going to say the second one.
Oh.
I was going to go with one, but
Right.
So yeah, that was good. All right. Next one. Billy Correndo.
Where is he? He's out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Out in the hall somewhere.
So if you see him, don't tell him what the answer is, because we'll ask him later. All right. So one of these is his quote. The first one is, Java is a lot like a chainsaw. It's incredibly powerful, but you need to know what you're doing or you might hurt yourself. Or, Java is like the trusty old minivan in your garage. Not the flashiest ride, but when it comes to getting the job done, you know you can always count on it.
Yeah, I feel fairly confident that it's the second one here. I think it's fairly obvious to me.
Damn!
Really?
You didn't wait for us. Come on, man. Come on.
I felt more sure about that one than any of them because I felt like that's a more true statement than the first one.
So Bill is just half truthy. It's JavaScript. JavaScript-ish. All right, fine. I keep forgetting. All right, we're going to let you play. All right, Josh Long. And we did ask him this. So coding is like a never-ending puzzle, where the goal is not just to solve the problem, but to do it the most creative and efficient way possible. Or is the quote that Josh said, coding is not just about writing code, it's about constantly learning, collaborating with others, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
I don't know, man. That's a 50-50 on this one. How about the first one?
First one.
I say B.
Second.
2.
And second. And the answer is...
Man.
Second one.
Wow.
But you can feel that he could have said both of them.
For sure.
It was they do it the most creative way.
I want to know the prompt you got it to do this because I literally tried to get it to write stuff from me because I feel like I get asked the same questions and I was like, can you just write an answer like Brian would say about SCA? And it wouldn't do it. It said I'm not allowed to do that. So I really want to know how you figured this out.
All right. No, we'll tell you the secret sauce for some Sonatype security. All right. This is Pratik Patel, which if you don't know, he is the one who is actually, or one of the big organizers of this conference, right? So one of them is his quote. The first one is, software development is like building a house. You need a solid foundation, a clear plan, and a team of skilled professionals to bring it to life. Or, software development is not just about writing code. It's about solving problems, thinking critically, and constantly innovating.
I'm going to go with the first one.
First one?
This one's a lot tougher for me. I like what the first one says, but it feels too wordy for Pratik.
Depends where you get him, right?
How many beers in? Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to go B.
Second.
I'm going 2.
Second. All right. And the answer, second, was right.
Yeah, I think your best play is just to choose the opposite of me.
Somebody will win. It's contrarian investment. Like. And of course, we did ask ChatGPT, and you know about you.
So you got it to do it, and I couldn't.
Let's see how well it does.
So this is from Brian Fox. The question is, so there's 2 questions. It's like how good of a memory you have, how much you know yourself, right? So the first quote is, security is not a product, it's a process, and it's everybody's responsibility. The second one is, security is like a game of whack-a-mole. The moment you think you cover all your bases, another vulnerability pops up and demands your attention. And before you answer, because there might be a bias, I'm going to start that way. Which one do you think Brian Fox actually said? The first one or the second one?
I was hoping you would go with him first, but that's fine. No, let's say number one.
Number one.
I feel like this one's a trick one, and it's going to be both. I'm going to say it's the second one.
Second one. All right.
Yeah, I think I remember the second one. I don't think I would have. I don't think I would have said the first one. I really hope.
It was
Come on.
UConn.
Really?
Yeah, it was in like 2006.
I don't believe you. In 2006.
You don't remember what you said 16 years ago? What is wrong with you, Brian? Seriously.
I think I was talking about security in 2006, but
It was
okay.
old. It was old. But
Okay.
it said, I did ask, because I wanted to make sure. It's like, where is your source, ChatGPT?
Maybe that was one of these secret ones somebody ghost wrote for me. That might have happened.
I keep paying. See, like this is why S-bombs are important.
Providence.
You need to
Providence.
Providence of
No,
where the
yeah,
quote.
yeah. Where did the quote come from? Prove that it came from Brian.
He doesn't even know. And I think that was the last of the slides. Brian, thank you so much for playing with us. Thank you so much for discussing with us. I think that for this episode of OffHeap, security is not just that it's important. That is we all know that, but it's more about that us as developers are the ones who are now in charge of helping push forward security, right? Like it's not that it's important; it's that it should be important for developers. So that is kind of like the message of this OffHeap podcast, and they're going to make it our responsibility because there is essentially they're making legislation make us more responsible. So like to say, go forth, go back to your jobs and ask about if they know what S-bombs are and Providence. And if they don't, then tell them we should probably start taking a look at that and start a conversation in all the places where you work, right? All right. And with that, we end up our OffHeap episode. Happy programming, everyone.
You're looking at me. Oh, you want the final word, that's why. But yeah.
Don't I always get it?
You usually do. So. All right, bye, everybody.
Josh signing off.
Michael signing off. If you're on Twitter, follow us at OffHeap. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
We're done. Thank you
All
so
right,
much.
thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that was fun.